We're coming to the end of this study in the book of Acts very quickly, and I want to remind you something not from this study but from the sermon that I preached on Pentecost this year, in which I said that the moment of Pentecost, that dramatic moment of the Spirit's outpouring upon the early church with the sound of a violent wind and fire and the spark of revolution, was just the beginning. Is the rest of the book of Acts that is the journey of that movement, that early Jesus movement taking shape around the life and ministry and teachings of Jesus that continued to live on in his disciples. And this is the next to the last chapter in that journey. And I want to note with you here how filled even this stage and the journey is with uncertainty and difficulty and danger. All throughout this passage in chapter 27, when Paul is sailing for Rome, I want to make sure you see here he is a prisoner. This is not the first time you've seen the disciples in the book of Acts become prisoners of the empire. So Paul is here on a prisoner ship full of a couple of hundred prisoners going to Rome when they encounter dangerous storms. So many times in this passage it says, the winds were against us. We arrived with difficulty. We sailed past it with difficulty. Sailing was now dangerous. The voyage will be with danger and much heavy loss. And as I record this video, this is the morning after, I believe, the seventh night of really dramatic protests in cities around the country, riots and demonstrations calling for justice in the death of George Floyd, but even more than that, calling for a more just society in which we truly address and deconstruct and dismantle the mechanisms of white supremacy and racist violence. That journey is one in which we are kind of moving through the choppiness of seas that are quite uncertain right now, where we see even our own president fomenting violence and mobilizing the military for use against his own citizens. So I want to really help you see yourselves in this story of the book of Acts, this story of the disciples in the earliest iteration of the church, following the mission and message of Jesus through times that were absolutely uncertain and dangerous. This is our milieu. This is the nature of discipleship. And we see it here all the way at the end of the book of Acts as Paul is a prisoner traveling to Rome. And just like so many times before, especially reminiscent of the slave ships that brought African slaves to the U.S., the prisoners were mere cargo. And when things got difficult, the soldiers on board wanted to throw the prisoners overboard and get rid of them, because when they couldn't control their bodies any longer, they could at least control their deaths. We've seen that happen through history, through the history of white supremacy and the subjugation and violence against black bodies. And in the midst of this, Paul is trying to talk sense into the people who are in charge here, trying to help them navigate their way safely to shore with everyone still alive. And in the midst of it all, many days, I believe said 14 days after any of them had eaten, Paul says they need to eat something. They need to strengthen their bodies. And in a scene very clearly portraying a mirror of the Last Supper of Jesus, Paul takes bread and blesses it and passes it out, and they eat it. And Willie Jennings says of that passage something I think is really helpful. He says, this is not an allegory, but reality. We are always on this ship, and the question for the church is not whether we will eat, but when and where we will offer food, and under what conditions will we invite those fear-laden and troubled to eat. When and where will we offer food, and under what conditions will we invite those fear-laden and troubled to eat? It's a question for us right now. in the midst of the storm that we are living through and trying to be faithful within. And I want to note here at the end of this text, what you see is them arriving to shore, but arriving to shore on a ship that has been broken apart by hitting a reef. They arrive to shore by those who could swim, swimming, and by those who can't swim, grabbing a hold of these broken pieces of the ship, planks and other pieces of wood, and floating to shore. They barely make it. They're holding on to the ruins of this ship in order to make it ashore together.